I always like to come back to the why when it comes to everything that there is to know about pretty much anything. So the why here, if you understand why these tools are important, why these concepts are important, that's what's going to get you more mileage in an interview. So for example, we need to monitor and alert services because there's a difference between how it's designed to work and how it actually works when we're talking about software services. The kind of the biggest ways to perform observability. And these three ways, there's arguably four ways, but three pillars, and picture of the British Museum with its pillars there for you. Metrics, tracing, and logging. We're going to go into each of these briefly. The optional fourth one that sometimes is argued for is called errors. And the reason why there are three pillars, it's partially because of the different types of information you get from this, but also because there are often specific tools designed to gather each pillar. That can be good and bad. When you have a tool for each pillar, then that does kind of separate your monitoring data across different tool sets. And so if you're debugging, you have to jump around between, okay, go to this tool to look at the metrics, go to this tool to look at the tracing, go to this tool to look at the logging. People have found that to be a bit of an anti-pattern, but nevertheless, products exist for each pillar separately, including optionally errors. So metrics, you're probably mostly familiar with metrics, just a over time collection of numbers that basically can answer the question of when something failed. They're relatively easy to store. I say easy in that it's straightforward to store numbers. A lot of databases are optimized for storing time series. They're called time series databases, or TSDB. So yeah, fairly straightforward here. Logs. Logs are a little bit more complicated when it comes to storage and indexing, but logs are still pretty straightforward on the surface. We're probably plenty familiar with logs just being this output of text that a process does as it's doing its job. But logging, and we'll get into this when we get to the logging topic specifically later, but they get closer to answering why something failed. They're also important for logging actual events and transactions and having a specific time when that occurred. So even though metrics can show when something failed or when roughly something affected health or the behavior of a service, logs can really give you that fine-tuned, okay, what process did it go through? What actions did it take, and what, where did it break down in the code as well? Traces. So traces are a little bit like logging. You could extract traces from logging. You could also extract metrics from logging. But basically, we want to see in a highly distributed system where a request is flowing through that system. So if you have multiple microservices, microservice architecture, and you need, okay, a request comes in, user requests from their client browser or from their app on their phone or something like that, and it hits a bunch of services. And if it breaks along the way somewhere, traces are meant to help track where that went, how much time it spent with each service, and where it might have been lost or broken down. And so there are sometimes specific pieces of software solutions that you can use. For example, Jaeger, that's Jaeger, is a tracing solution. And that's the kind of thing where if you can set up Jaeger for everybody in your company, so everybody's service uses Jaeger, then you can hopefully get for free a lot of this tracing information for requests, and then it'll help you track it through the system, find out, okay, in which component did this request break down? So yeah, again, this is something that comes at scale, highly distributed systems, microservices. Not that microservices are strictly necessary for having traces. I mean, you could have traces even if you had a monolithic server. But in that case, you maybe would just derive that from logs anyway. So that's the 3 pillars. And a lot of people argue that you can't just use any one pillar individually. You kind of need all 3 to build the full picture. And then a quick note on the errors pillar. To give you an example of software for errors, I've seen something called Sentry. So Sentry is I think it's optionally hosted piece of software. Like I think that there's a vendor behind it. You might be able to self-host it, but yeah, Sentry is also something that you could have all the services in your company hook up to, so that anytime there is an error encountered in the user workflow, that error gets logged immediately to Sentry, and then you can just go to that website and see, okay, here's all the errors for our service that we're seeing, and gives you the nice UI to do that. So a lot of options to try to monitor your service, and then Sentry would specifically be great if you wanted to find out if all of a sudden a bunch of users are seeing tons of errors, although you might use metrics for that and alert on that. Or you want to know the kinds of errors, especially if there's only occasional errors. You want to know exactly what they are, where they happened, and stuff like that.